This is the story of Prophet Yusuf and Zulaikha. Nabi Yaqub was the son of Nabi Ishaq and the grandson of Nabi Ibrahim. He had 12 sons. His youngest son was Nabi Yusuf. Nabi Yaqub loved his youngest son Yusuf very much. The other 10 sons of Nabi Yaqub were very jealous of Yusuf and his full brother Benjamin, even though they were the youngest of them all. They thought their father loved their two youngest brothers, and especially Yusuf, much more than them. One night, when Nabi Yusuf was still a child, he had a dream. He described this dream to his father Nabi Yaqub and said, in which he saw 11 stars, the sun and the moon were making sajda to him. When he told this to his father replied, "My son, do not recount your dream to your brothers, lest they should devise schemes against you. Satan is indeed man's manifest enemy." So when his brothers took him out and described to his father that they'd be out to play, and when in reality they wanted to throw him in the well in a desert, they killed an animal and threw blood on his shirt and told his father that he was killed by a wolf, but when in reality they just threw him in the well and left him in there. Shortly after Nabi Yusuf was thrown to a well, a caravan was traveling through the countryside where Nabi Yusuf had been thrown to a well. When they saw the well, they threw a bucket into it in the hope of getting some water. However, when they pulled the bucket out, they saw a little boy. They were surprised to find him and decided to take him to their destination in Egypt, where they could sell him for a profit. So they hid him in their caravan together with all their merchandise. When they reached Egypt, they sold him as a slave in the marketplace for a very small price. The person who bought him took him home and said to his wife, "Take good care of this boy, for he may be useful to us or we may adopt him as our son." When Nabi Yusuf was young, he was taken by a slave master who was a high-ranking chief in Egypt. He took Nabi Yusuf home and took good care of him. Nabi Yusuf grew up into a handsome young man. One day, Zulaikha, the chief's wife and lady of the house, tried to seduce him. She locked the doors and invited Nabi Yusuf into her room. Nabi Yusuf knew that this was wrong and responded saying, "God forbid, indeed he is my lord, he has given me a good home. Indeed the wrongdoers are not successful." What this meant was, he could have easily given to Zulaikha's seduction, but instead he remembered Allah and remained God-conscious. Allah therefore turned indecency and evil away from him and chose him as his dedicated servant. This is indeed a great honor for any person. Zulaikha persisted tempting Nabi Yusuf into sin, but he started running away from her. She ran after him, and as she tried to grab him, she tore his shirt from behind. Just then, her husband walked into the door. To protect herself, she blamed Nabi Yusuf and said to her husband, "What is the punishment of him who has evil intentions for your wife except imprisonment or painful punishment?" Nabi Yusuf insisted he was innocent and that she was the one who tried to seduce him. Knowing that Yusuf was an honest and sincere man, Zulaikha's husband wondered what to do. Someone from her family suggested that if his shirt was torn from the front, then he would be at fault, but if it was torn from the back, then it was her fault. When the master of the house saw the torn shirt, he was convinced of Nabi Yusuf's innocence. He commanded his wife to ask for forgiveness for what she had done and asked Yusuf not to disclose the news. However, over time, the news spread by other members of the house, and the aristocrat women of the city started mocking Zulaikha, saying that the chief's wife had fallen in love with her slave boy. To justify her actions, Zulaikha invited them to her house and offered them fruits. She also gave them knives to cut the fruit. She called Nabi Yusuf into the room. The guests saw him and were captivated by his beauty so much that they absentmindedly started cutting their hands with the knives in their holding. They said, "God heavens, this is not a human being, but this is a noble angel." Zulaikha responded saying, "This is a young man on whose account you blame and mock me. I will continue to pursue him, and if he does not get into my demands, I will throw him in prison." Nabi Yusuf knew that he only had two options at this point. It was to either give in to Zulaikha's demands or go to prison. Nabi Yusuf remained strong in faith and did not give in to Zulaikha's demands. He said, "My lord, the prison is dearer to me than to what they invite me. If you do not turn away their schemes from me, then I will incline towards them and become one of the senseless." So his lord answered him and turned away from the stratagems from him. Indeed, he is the all-hearing and the all-knowing. There's many lessons we can learn from Nabi Yusuf's story. However, there are four trivial things that are very important to Nabi Yusuf's story that we may understand. The first one being the role of fitrah. For example, everyone knows that the theft and murder are wrong. Nabi Yusuf listens to his inner voice, his natural instinct, and then he was confronted by Zulaikha. His master, who had bought him as a slave, had been kind to him and gave him a good home. How could we betray him by committing an indecent act with his wife? Giving in to Zulaikha's demands would have been senseless and not the right thing to do. This is why he prayed to Allah, saying, "If you do not turn away your schemes from me, then I will incline towards them and become one of the senseless." Paying attention to his fitr also made him turn to Allah for help whenever he was faced with a difficult situation. The second lesson that we can learn from Prophet Yusuf's story is the isma of Anbiya. We know that Anbiya were masum, sinless. This does not mean they were not capable of sinning. They also had free will just like us. However, due to their knowledge of sin and its consequences, they chose not to sin. We see from the story of Nabi Yusuf that he chose not to give in to temptation. We even confided in Allah his weaknesses that he would fall into temptation. If Allah did not help him, keep away from it. We too can choose to turn to Allah when faced with temptation to do wrong, and Allah has promised that He would listen to us even if when we turn for Him to help. The third notable lesson that we can learn from Prophet Nabi Yusuf's story is the strength to withstand trials. Nabi Yusuf's story is exemplary in teaching us patience. Whenever he was faced with choice between hardship and suffering versus giving into temptation, he chose suffering and hardship rather than sinning against Allah. This is because he had complete trust in Allah. He knew that these difficult situations were a test from Allah, and if he remained patient rather than giving into the whispers of shaitan, he would get closer to Allah and his status in front of Allah would be elevated. The fourth final lesson we can learn from Nabi Yusuf's story is God consciousness. Deen teaches people that Allah is always watching and every action is being recorded and will be accounted for on the Day of Judgment. So God consciousness is basically people police their own selves. Nabi Yusuf teaches us that a religious person does not need a police officer to be honest. Their faith is their police and watches over them.